Can't get any sound.
In my high school, know her.
Thank you. So because it's so busy there, in most places in the world, when you are out in a boat, any boat coming from your right has the right of way. In the English Channel is one of the few places in the world where there's actually traffic control, and it's divided up like a road. Interestingly, like an American road, they don't drive on the wrong side like they do in the rest of Britain. But there are two shipping channels that go in each direction. Each one is about 5 miles wide, and they're separated by this separation zone, which is about a mile wide. And then there's an inland zone, which is more for pleasure boats and fishermen and things like that. But this is just full of freighters going back and forth. And the ports of Dover and Calais act like air traffic control, navigating ships through the channel area. And this has greatly reduced collisions in the channel. I'm going to do questions at the end, if that's okay. No, it's not going forward now. I broke it. Oh, there we go. So it cut off. No, it cut off the end of it for some reason. So the English Channel is such a narrow little puddle. I don't know why the rest of it's not there. You can't help wondering why no one successfully crossed it since 1066. So the channel has been a formidable barrier for England. It's protected them from invasion for literally over 1,000 years. The last successful invasion of England was in 1066 by William the Conqueror, and his descendants remain on the throne of England to this day. There are many fortresses along the Straits of Dover area. When we were there, we toured a bunch of them. And most recently, obviously, it protected them from the Nazis. And it was long considered uncrossable without a boat or an airship until 1870. A ship sank in the English Channel, and one of the crew members managed to grab onto a floating piece of straw and floated across the channel the rest of the way and was rescued to safety. And this was covered extensively in the press in England and kind of inspired people to think, what about swimming across this unswimmable channel? So what makes swimming the English Channel so hard? There are 4 main obstacles to getting across: the distance, the currents, the temperature, and what I'll call unpredictables. So the distance is 22 miles at the narrowest point. And most people are more familiar with running than swimming, but in swimming, it's a 4-to-1 conversion from swimming to running. So a marathon in swimming is 6 miles. And that is arrived from, essentially, water is 800 times denser than air, so it's much harder to move through. And if you look at how long it takes an Olympic athlete to run a marathon, the elite athletes can finish a marathon in about 2 hours, and it takes about 2 hours for an Olympic swimmer to swim the 6-mile Olympic marathon. So the channel is at least 4 marathons long to get across. And I say at least because of the second barrier, and that is the currents. The tides in the English Channel are 7 meters or 21 feet a day. Twice a day, the water level goes up and down 21 feet. So this is me standing in Dover Harbor, or sorry, Folkestone Harbor. And oops, that's the wrong way. This is the top of you can see kind of the water lines here, a little above 7 with the spring tides, a little below with the neap tides. These tides moving up and down make strong currents that move the length of the channel. So if you try to go across, you get pushed sideways as you're trying to go across. And you cannot swim straight across the English Channel because of the currents. You'll end up having an S-shaped course. The bigger the tides, the wider the S. So ideally, you want to swim on what's called a neap tide, where the sun and the moon are perpendicular to each other with the earth in the middle. When they're all in a line, you have spring tides and the tides are higher and the currents are stronger. The slower you go, the longer you will swim. So this is Folkestone Harbor about mid-tide. And if you look close along the seawall, you can see this dark line. That's kind of the high water mark there of the end of the breakwater. This is Folkestone Harbor at low tide. That tide marker that I was standing in front of earlier is right at the end of this, and the top of it is right up here. The bottom says 2 meters because 2 meters lower than that is where sea level is at low tide. So the boats are all just sitting on the bottom. You can't really see it here, but this is like a cliff off the end of this, where it goes down to the bottom of the harbor. So that's how much the water goes up and down a day. The slower you go, the longer you go. So the current 2 world record holders for the longest, the fastest and the slowest crossing of the English Channel Grimsley holds the record for the fastest crossing at just under 7 hours. And you can see it's almost a straight line, probably about 24 miles across. The record for the longest crossing was held for 83 years by the second guy to cross the English Channel. It was just broken in 2010 by Jackie Corbell, who took 28 hours. And you can see each one of these is the change in the tide. This is probably 15 miles or more wide here. So she took 65 miles to cross the English Channel. And that itself is people think, oh, this slow, that's terrible, but that's actually an impressive record as well, because of the third challenge, which is temperature. The average swimming season in the English Channel is from the last week of June to the first week of October, typically, because that's the only time the water is warm enough. The water in midsummer averages about 60, give or take 2 degrees. And the rest of the season, it's colder. I swam there in April, and it was, just as this says, it was 47 degrees when I swam in April on another trip. But so you need the water to be up near 60, 58 or so is when a lot of the first swims make it across. And that's the time that you have to get across, is those few months. And that's because you lose body heat 24 times faster in water than you do in air. If you've ever been outside in the cold and then outside in the cold when you're soaking wet, it feels a lot colder. Your life expectancy in the water is not very long when it is cold. This table is from a shipping book that talks about the life expectancy and how long you have to live if you fall into the water off a boat. When it is down near 30, you have about 15 to 30 minutes to live. And it goes up as you get warmer. But at about 60, most of the charts show that you're going to start to lose consciousness at about 2 hours. And that's about the temperature of the English Channel. You've got about 2 to 3 hours for most people. So you have to train to be able to tolerate the cold to make it across. And that is the limiting factor. Jackie Corbell, who took 28 hours to get across, she is what's called an ice swimmer. She swam the straits, the Bering Straits at 36 degrees. She swam in Russia, where the ambient temperature is 40 below Fahrenheit in water that they cut a hole through the deep, thick ice to get through. So she's done some extreme cold stuff, and you have to have extreme cold tolerance to survive in the water that long when it's that cold. So to kind of give an analogy to running, it's like essentially 4 marathons is from here to Chicago. So it's like running from here to Chicago. Most people could walk that if you had enough time, if you had unlimited time, but the currents demand that you keep a pace or it gets longer. So it's like running 7-minute miles the whole way while you're soaking wet in the winter, is kind of a comparison to swimming the English Channel. And then there are the unpredictables, other things that can happen. And for the channel, the main one is weather. Aquatic life, there are not a lot of sharks. That doesn't tend to be a big issue, but there are jellyfish, and that can end your swim if you get into too many of them. They don't tend to have the really dangerous ones, but just a multitude of stings, especially in the face. You can swell up, and that can be the end of it. Nausea, health issues, the boat can break down. There's all kinds of stuff that can happen. So the first known attempt of the English Channel was in 1872. Oh, backwards here. A guy named J.B. Johnson. So after hearing this story about the guy floating across on the bale of straw, he's thought, I'm going to give it a try. And he began in England, and he made it 1 hour and 3 minutes before he gave up. But it caught the attention of the press. This is a press report from one of the London papers. And it got people thinking about this unswimmable channel and can it be swum? And the challenge was kind of on. It was hyped up in the press to see who could be the first to do it. This was a song thing, and I wish I could swim like J.B. Johnson for 1 hour and 3 minutes. So it was an American named Captain Paul Boynton. He was a showman who did a lot of water stunts and things. He helped establish the U.S. Life-Saving Service, and he was actually the captain of the Life-Saving Service in New Jersey. He heard about this suit by this guy named Merriman that developed that was made out of India rubber. And you can see him wearing the suit here. And it was kind of the precursor to the modern survival suit that they carry on boats to tolerate cold water. But the idea is that if your ship sank, you'd put this suit on and you could stay floating by blowing up these tubes with air and keep yourself warm enough to survive in the water. And he decided he was going to test this out. And he first took it out to sea in a storm and floated and survived. And then he decided, I'm going to do the English Channel in this suit. So in April of 1875, he hopped in the water, got a boat to take him across. He went up almost 16 hours, about 15 hours, about 50 miles floating across. He actually had a sail attached to his foot as he went across. And I have some pictures that kind of depict that. To go across, the weather got rough and the captain demanded that they stop. And he required him to sign an affidavit that said he didn't quit. The captain made him stop. He went back again and was successful in June of 1875 and was able to cross the English Channel. He is not credited with the first swim across because he mostly floated. He had a sail on his foot. And to this day, the bodies that control long distance or regulate long distance open water swimming, you're not allowed to use a wetsuit. It does not count if you wear a wetsuit. The Marathon Swim Federation, the Channel Swimming Association, all the different groups do not allow wetsuits to go across. Yes, you can use grease. That is allowed, but otherwise it is a textile suit is all you're allowed with no thermal protection from it. This is the patent for the Merriman suit. And here's a picture of them wearing it. Here you can see this sail thing and all the different things you can do with this wonderful suit on. Paul Boynton went on to use his notoriety for other things. In 1894, he opened the world's first paid amusement park right in Chicago, Illinois, Paul Boynton's Water Chutes. And you can see a picture of it there. He rode in this wooden sled down and crashed into the lake. He then, the following year, opened Sea Lion Park on Coney Island, which later became Coney Island Amusement Park. And there you can see Coney Island down below with its own water chute, Captain Boynton. And this is supposedly him. I have no idea what this giant water thing is that he's holding, but and this is with his suit. I thought one of these, let me see, showed him with the little sail on his foot. Maybe it was the other one. No, this is the sail on his foot right here. Little sail attached to his foot with his bugle to call out to the world. So the first one that's given credit for swimming the English Channel was Captain Matthew Webb. He completed the first successful swim a few months later in August of 1875, and he became world famous from this. He was famous like Charles Lindbergh or Neil Armstrong at the time because this was thought to be an unconquerable feat that no one could do this. And so he gained worldwide fame for his accomplishments. He was born in about 1848, so he was 27 when he swam the channel as one of 14 kids. And at age 12, he joined a ship to learn to be a sailor and spent 2 years on a training ship. He got a job on the Cunard Line ship called Russia. And one of the things he did to distinguish himself is on a transatlantic trip, a passenger fell overboard and he jumped off the boat to try to retrieve them. He never recovered the passenger, but he was rescued by the boat 35 minutes later, and he was awarded 100 pounds sterling. That would be a pretty good, that's probably 40 times that today. So a pretty good reward. And he was the first recipient of the Stanhope Medal, which is given to the hero of Britain each year. By 1873, Webb had become the captain of the steamship Emerald. That's where the captain comes from in his name. And he read a news account of J.B. Webb and his crossing of the channel and thought, hey, I think I can do that. And so he started training. And there were other people training as well to try to be the first man across. In August 12, he tried to swim across, but was unsuccessful. And 12 days later, on the 24th, he jumped off Admiralty Pier in Dover and made his second attempt. He swam breaststroke the entire way across, which was considered the most efficient stroke at the time. The first several swims were all breaststroke. For the cold, he drank an occasional brandy to keep warm, which was apparently the early version of sports nutrition. He endured multiple jellyfish stings, and 21 hours and 41 minutes later, he landed in Calais, France, to become the first to swim across the channel. The strong currents resulted in a 41-mile course across the 22-mile Straits of Dover. After the swim, as I said, he was world famous. He wrote a book called The Art of Swimming, which there's a copy of here. He proceeded to do a whole bunch of stunt things as a way to make money. One of them was floating 128 hours in a tank of water. Lots of other stunt things he did. He organized a swim for the swimming champion of England, where he raced a bunch of other swimmers and won. And in 1879, he got Paul Boynton to come and do a race, which he won, but he didn't get the reward because they said he cheated. I'm not sure exactly how he cheated, but he kept doing stunts. And in 1883, 8 years after the channel, he was offered a $2,000 reward for swimming the rapids beneath Niagara Falls. He entered the water from a boat below the falls, and he swam down the rapids, and people saw him going down the rapids. He'd disappear, he'd pop back up, he'd swim again, and somewhere near the Niagara whirlpool, he disappeared for the last time. His body was recovered 4 days later by fishermen down near the end of the Niagara River. They feel the strong currents had pulled him under and he was unable to break free. And he's buried in New York, actually, right near Niagara Falls. His brother placed a memorial in his hometown in England that is inscribed with "Nothing great is easy," which is still the motto of many channel swimmers around the world. The second person to swim the English Channel was Bill Burgess. I'm not going to talk about every one of them, but I'll talk about the first several because I find them interesting. Bill Burgess was an accomplished swimmer. He was on the French water polo team for the Olympics and won a bronze medal in 1900. He also was fourth in the 4,000 meter freestyle and fifth in the 200 meter backstroke. So he was a good swimmer for the time. He had 17 unsuccessful attempts to cross the English Channel. 3 in 1904, 5 in 05, 4 in 06, 1 in 07, 4 in 08. More than 70 attempts had been made since Webb. And there was a 1,000 pound sterling reward, which would be probably about $30,000 today, offered by the Daily Sketch for anyone who could swim across the channel. On September 5, 1911, 36 years after Captain Webb, he successfully crossed the channel, about an hour or two slower than Captain Webb at 22:35. He wore motorcycle goggles to protect his eyes. They leaked like crazy, but he swam breaststroke, so it didn't matter so much. When he went across, they said the water was so calm and the sails were so slack that they had to row the boat across. So each year they say there's one perfect day to cross the channel. That was the day that year. And he made it across. He said one of the greatest thrills of his life is he got a telegram from King George V congratulating him on his journey. And he did indeed receive a check for 1,000 pounds sterling on the other side. He later became a trainer, and you could see he got 1,000 pounds sterling, and like, I don't know how many pounds that would weigh, but that's a big cup. That's the Alexander Cup that was given by Mr. Alexander, the president of the Channel Swimming Association, when he made it across. He eventually became a trainer and trained other swimmers from 1922 to 1934. This is him right there, the old guy, as a trainer years later. And several of these are, this is Hemi, who's a channel swimmer, and Gertrude Ederle is on the end there, who you'll hear about in just a minute here. He had another attempt in 1922, but he actually went with one of his students and stopped partway across to help navigate them across to try to get them there. During the war, he was taken prisoner by the Nazis and held in a camp and was released within about a year. So that was 1911. 1923, there were 3 successful swims across the channel, 48 years since Captain Webb. The first was the first American, Henry Sullivan, attempted numerous times. So his first attempt was in 1913. He tried twice in 1920 and 1921, and he was shut out by bad weather in 1922. There was a big race in America in 1923 where he set the record for continuous distance swimming, and he outswam a guy named Charles Toth, which you'll hear about in just a minute, who also crossed the channel in 23. On August 5, it was a calm day, but we kind of came choppy towards the end, and he was able to make it across the channel. He was escorted out by the third guy who made it across the channel, helped him out of the water. Here you can see him getting his grease on before he goes across. And there he is, swimming across the English Channel. He also received a check for 1,000 pounds sterling from the Daily Sketch. He was given the Alexander Cup, a new one. This cup was just auctioned off about 10 years ago for $20,000. The one Burgess had has been lost. No one knows what happened to it. It's missing. I don't know. Yeah. The current trophies, if you get a trophy for swimming the channel, they're all held in the Dover Museum. You get the trophy at the presentation, you have to give it back at the end. You can go visit it in the museum anytime you want. So, as I said, he held the record for the longest channel swim. So you can see the dark line here is the course that Captain Webb took, which is actually a pretty good course across. Burgess, the second guy, is this dotted line. And we'll talk a little later about how navigation has changed, but I don't know how they were navigating. He made a complete loop. He's going the wrong way. I think their compass was upside down. And then Sullivan's route is the one that's kind of dashed. It's the one that goes back and forth a whole bunch of times here at the end, where he ran into a current called La Barrière in France. There's a current that runs across this course or this coast that is very strong. It's about a 6 mile an hour current. An Olympic long distance swimmer swims at 3 miles an hour. So you cannot outswim that current and it pushes you sideways. And he was not making much forward progress. And then the last one here, Tem, is a guy who swam across a few years later that takes a little more direct course. Sullivan's course covered 65 miles, so about the same as Jackie Corbel, who you can see below there, who broke his record 83 years later. The fourth guy to swim the channel that same year, and not much later, was Enrico Tarabucci, who was born in Italy, moved to Argentina, and kind of established himself in swimming by breaking Burgess's record for the longest continuous swim of 24 hours. And he had 2 failed channel attempts in 21 and 22. So all of these guys, almost all of them, tried multiple times before they made it across. He has the distinction of being the first one to swim from France to England. So everyone before him started in England and went to France. He had the bright idea of starting in France and going to England, which is actually the easier way across because you get by that strong current right away. And there is a broader landing zone in England. In France, there's a point that sticks out that's the shortest distance that you want to hit. And if you miss that, it's a much longer swim. When you swim the other way, you can start on the point and you swim across to the English shore is fairly straight, so it makes it easy, easier. And partly because of that, he smashed the speed record that Webb had held for 50 some years. By crossing in 16 hours and 33 minutes, 5 hours faster than Webb and 9 hours faster than Sullivan the week before. 3 others tried at the same time, including Toth, who would be the next guy to swim, but he didn't make it that day. And he also received a check for £1,000 and a gold medal and a trophy. He donated his winnings to the International Swimming Federation, which would have been, again, a lot of money at that time. He brought his trophy back with him, went through Switzerland and to go back home to Italy, and it was confiscated at the border for failure to pay duty. And he appealed to Benito Mussolini and won his appeal. Mussolini ruled that it was a prize and not purchased and therefore not subject to duty, and he got his trophy back. Charles Toth was the second American. He was the last guy to cross in 1923. And he worked as a waiter in Boston. He had emigrated to the US from abroad. He trained with Bill Burgess, the second guy to make it across. So he was one of the first guys he helped to train. He had 2 failed attempts in 22, and then the one is the same day as Tarabucci in 1923. And on September 9, he made it across. He was only 7 minutes slower than Tarabucci, but he didn't get the record. And to make matters worse, the Daily Sketches prize had an expiration date, which he missed by 2 days. As a waiter, I'm sure he would have liked an extra $20,000 for his troubles, but he got nothing for it. So in 1926, so 3 years later, there were 5 successful crossings. So the number is going up. People said women couldn't swim the channel, but I proved they could. Gertrude Ederle, 1926. Gertrude Ederle is one of the most famous people to swim the English Channel. She was born in 1906, and she trained with the elite swimming group of the time, the Women's Swimming Association in New York. They were the group that pushed to get women's swimming respected and to put into international competition. They fought to be able to wear a swimsuit that was not full length. You had to have a full length dress to race swimming before that. And they fought to get rid of that. You could wear a miniskirt length dress with underclothing underneath it. She helped develop the American crawl. So the Australian crawl had already been developed, which was the predecessor to modern freestyle. Her and her coach, Eppie Epstein, developed the American crawl, which is a faster version of that. She set the world record for the 880 freestyle at 12 years old. As a teenager, she held 29 US and national records from 1921 to 1925. And in 1924, she competed at the Paris Olympics at age 18. She was favored to win gold in all her events. She won gold in the 100 freestyle, or the 4x100 freestyle relay, which she's pictured here with her relay team. And there's her gold medal. She won bronze in her 100 and 400 freestyles. And she said that the biggest disappointment of her career was not winning gold at the Olympics. At that time, the swimsuits were made of wool, and you can see the mini skirt version of the suit. That is the competition suit. That's not a pullover that they wore for competing in the Olympics. That team, Olympic team, was very notable. They won 99 medals and included Johnny Weissmuller, who later became Tarzan, won multiple medals. And they were greeted when they came home with a ticker tape parade in New York City. While she was there, she had read about the channel crossings in 1923, the year before. And in 25, she turned pro. The WSA, the Women's Swimming Association, sponsored her for a channel swimming trip. As a practice swim, she swam the 22 miles between Battery Park, New York and Sandy Hook in 7 hours and 11 minutes. And that record stood for 81 years. Until Tammy Van Weiss broke it in 2006. That is a fast time to this day for that swim. It's 3 miles an hour, which would be an Olympic speed today. She hired a coach named Jabez Wolfe in England, and he is sometimes called the unluckiest channel swimmer in history. He made 22 unsuccessful attempts at the English Channel and never made it across. His attempts were ended in 1914 by World War I, and he was enlisted in the war, served in the Duke of Cambridge's regiment, and was wounded and sent home. He then began coaching along with the guy who had helped coach him, Billy Killingley, who's pictured here with him, and I believe that is Billy there, actually. He was quoted in the London paper saying, "Women may not be capable of swimming the channel." And whether that quote is really something he said or not, we'll talk about a little later. But things didn't go well with Gertrude Ederle. She came there to try to be the first woman to swim the channel, and there were many others trying for the same thing. Lady Americans Lillian Cannon, Clarabelle Barrett, and Amelia Gade Corson were all trying to swim across. Mercedes Gleitz from England had been trying for several years, and a French woman, Jean Chion, was also trying to make attempts. Papers had commentaries on women not being able to swim the channel. It was a common commentary in the papers, and there were 20-to-1 odds in London on any woman trying to swim the channel. Keep in mind that the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote had just been passed 6 years before. Training did not go well with Jabez. Jabez was constantly trying to slow her pace, saying that you will never make it at that speed. Partway across, Ederle stopped face down in the water, and Wolfe ordered her pacer, Isaac Helmy, who was also across the channel a few years later, to jump in and retrieve her. And as soon as he touched her, she was disqualified. She said she was not drowning, but nearly resting a moment, but her swim was over. And she left. She did not get another chance to swim the channel and left bitterly disappointed. So here she is in the back of the boat with Jabez Wolfe. And there's Hemi here in the water next to them after having retrieved her. She went home, and the problem was she didn't have money to go back to do another attempt, and she didn't want to ask the WSA to pay for another expensive trip across. So she came up with the idea of getting papers to sponsor her. So the New York Daily News and the Chicago Tribune sponsored her second trip across the channel in exchange for exclusive rights to her story. Another paper in Boston sponsored Lily Cannon to try to go across, and the papers both here and in Europe ginned up these rivalries between the swimmers, which most of them actually trained together, but they made it sound like there was a big rivalry to get across. She now hired a new coach, Bill Burgess, the second guy to swim the channel, and had coached Charles Toth. And she developed a new suit because she had so much trouble with chafing on her first attempt across. She made the world's first competitive two-piece suit. And it's hard to see, but she took the top of one suit, cut it off, sewed it tighter, and then took the under part of the bottom of another suit and made a bikini, which was scandalous at the time. It was only a few years before when they had to pull leggings on as soon as they got out of the water to cover their legs. But fortunately, it wasn't noticed or didn't really get much attention because she had so much goose fat on her that it just looked like one giant suit. You could hardly tell from the pictures. She crafted goggles made out of motorcycle goggles, I think partly from Bill Burgess's experience. But hers, she swam freestyle. She was the first one to swim the channel in freestyle. And so she wanted the goggles to be watertight. So they took hot wax, paraffin wax, and sealed them to her face. So she could not take her goggles off, but they worked for the swim. And those goggles are in the Smithsonian Institution today. Sorry, my slides got a little mixed up there. I think converting to PowerPoint. She left Cape Grenade, France, and made it to Kingston, Kent in a time of 14 hours and 34 minutes on August 6, 1926, at age 20. Not only did she make it across, but she broke the speed record by over 2 hours. Terabashi, who had held the speed record, proclaimed it was a marvelous swim. There were many who said she drafted off the boat and that's how she was so fast. But he said, no, it was her training and her great powers of resistance that allowed her to have the ability to complete the swim. The water became rough partway across. She ended up finishing in 5-foot waves that battered her face so that she was bruised on her face when she got in. Her father and her coach were in the boat, and they had strict orders that no one was to touch her after the other experience. And so they were calling out to her, Gertie, you must come out. And she was quoted replying, what for? And completed the swim. When she got out, her face was bruised and she could hardly talk because her tongue was so swollen from the salt water and the beating from the waves. But she was immediately famous, a household name throughout the U.S. on par with Babe Ruth. When she came home, this was her greeting in New York. There was a ticker tape parade. 2 million people met her in New York when she came home. She met the President of the United States, and she was the first female athlete to appear on the cover of Time magazine. Her fame was really not eclipsed until actually just a few months later when Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic. After swimming the channel, she toured vaudeville, did swimming exhibitions. There was a song and dance named her after her. She appeared as a star in a silent film called Swim Girl Swim, where she played herself. Unfortunately, vaudeville was not a huge financial success, and the Great Depression also kind of diminished the financial rewards. In 1933, she fell down the stairs of her apartment and suffered a severe spine injury that left her bedridden for years. In 1939, she came out and was able to do a swimming exhibition at the 1939 New York World's Fair. She'd had poor hearing since childhood because of measles, and by the 40s, she was almost completely deaf. She ended up teaching kids to swim at the Lexington School for the Deaf for the rest of her life. And she died at 98 years old, just in 2003. There's an annual swim held for her in her honor from Battery Park to Sandy Hook, where she held that record for so long. That's called the Etterly Swim. And it continues to follow her 1925 course. There's been a film, there should be a film coming out about her soon, starring Daisy Ridley of Star Wars fame, if you're into that, called Young Woman of the Sea, and that's expected to be released on Disney+. And she's often listed at or near the top of the greatest female athletes of all time. Later that year, just actually, I think a week or so later, the second woman made it across the channel, Amelia Gade Corson. She was the first mother to cross the channel, and those are her kids in the boat with her training. She was originally from Denmark. She started a swimming school there, and she moved to New York for greater opportunity. And she made a name for herself by swimming around the island of Manhattan, which today is the 20 Bridges swim, which I'll be swimming in September. It's 28 miles around Manhattan. She furthered that by deciding to go to Albany, New York, and swim down the Hudson to New York City, 156 miles, which is today the 8 Bridges swim. And she was the first to do either of them. A local businessman decided to sponsor her to try to swim the English Channel and paid $3,000 in expenses for her and her husband to go. She went, and her first attempt was unsuccessful on August 6th, the same day as Ederle swam across. So if she had made it, she could have been the first one across, but didn't make it that day. But she made it across on the 27th. And she was on pace to beat Ederle's time, but there was a change in current and she didn't quite make it. The sponsor of her trip placed a $5,000 bet on her being able to go across. And he placed the bet before Ederle made it across and got 20-to-1 odds and won $100,000 in 1926, which would be 20 times that today. So $2 million payout. So not bad. She was also greeted with I think a smaller ticker tape parade in New York and met the mayor. The 8th person to swim across was German. He had lost an eye as a child. He made it across on his second attempt, and he beat Ederle's time by about an hour and a half. And you'll often hear it quoted that Ederle's time was not beaten for till 1950, but that's actually false. It was beat about a week later by this German guy. But Ederle's record held for women until 1950. And even after that, she said her record was not beaten because the swimmer who beat her was on a nice calm day and not the 5-foot wave she endured. So she said it wasn't equivalent. Veercotter later went to Canada to compete in a race in Lake Ontario where he won and claimed a $30,000 reward for winning, and stayed in Canada for the rest of his life. French swimmer Georges Michel, I'm not sure how to say it in French, was a professional swimmer in Paris. He crossed not long after Veercotter and broke his record shortly thereafter to claim the speed record, which he held until 1950. But Veercotter got revenge in that he won the Lake Ontario race for $30,000. Michael got second with a $7,500 prize, so not quite the reward. After Ederle had swam across the channel, the paper in one of the papers in England, the News of the World, offer £1,000 sterling to any Englishman who could beat Ederle's record. And this guy, Norman Durham, which I love his hairdo there, decided he would try it, and he tried 2 times, didn't make it, but on the 3rd attempt, he was successful, and he was 16 minutes faster than Ederle. He also beat both Webb and Sullivan's times, the other 2 Englishmen, to become the fastest Brit, and he was awarded the cash prize of £1,000 sterling. 1927, there were 3 successful swims. One was Edward Tem, who was credited actually being the first person to cross the channel twice. He went once in each direction. The second time was not till 1934. He was the other, when I showed you the 3 courses of the guys earlier, this was the 4th guy actually on there. He was again an Olympian, played in the 1936 Berlin Olympics for the water polo team. The city of Dover had raised money for a gold cup to be presented to the next successful swim crossing from England, because everybody after Tiraboschi got the idea swimming from France was easier, and they did that. So Tem actually won that medal in 1934 after numerous attempts to cross from England. And he became what they call the King of the Channel, which is the most crossings by any individual, for 17 years until 1951. Mercedes Gleitz is another very interesting swimmer for the channel. She was the first British female to cross the channel. She was born in 1900 and kind of established herself by swimming races in the Thames River. Her goal was to be the first to cross the English Channel, and she started trying in 1922, but lost her dreams in 1926 when both Ederle and Corson eclipsed her by making it across. But all her attempts got covered in the paper, and she rose to quite a bit of fame for all her tries to crossing the channel. On her 8th trip across was a charm. She made it across the channel, and it got lots of publicity in England. And shortly afterwards, Dr. Dorothy Logan said she went across the channel. The problem was Dr. Dorothy Logan lied, and she was found out that it was a hoax, and that brought the validity of Gleitz's swim into question by both the press and the CSA. Both accused her of also cheating. There'd been a problem with her observer on the boat, and she didn't have conclusive proof that she had made it across. She was upset under pressure from the media, and upset by the insinuation of cheating. She announced she would do a vindication swim 2 weeks later. Her swim was already the latest in the year swim ever recorded, and the water temperature drops dramatically in October. Less than 1% of the swims across the English Channel have taken place in the month of October, let alone the end of October. And so on October 22, she announced she was going to swim across the channel, and big crowds of people showed up to watch her. There were crowds in the boats to watch her go across. The water temperature was in the low 50s, and after 10 hours, she failed and had to be pulled out of the water. And you can see her exhausted and cold, pulled out of the water. However, the media and the CSA that had accompanied on this boats to watch were so impressed by her endurance and her tolerance to the cold that they decided her original claim should stand and was valid. And so she received credit for making it across the channel. She tried 4 more times over the next several years and never made it again. So 14 trips and 1 was successful. On her vindication swim, Rolex had been working on a waterproof watch, the Oyster, and Jabez Wolfe was one of their ambassadors. They gave a watch to Mercedes Gleitz to wear during the swim. She wore it around her neck on a chain, and it withstood the challenges of swimming across the English Channel. And Mercedes Gleitz is still used in Rolex advertising to this day. Her original watch sold in 2000 at Christie's auction house for £17,000. Gleitz went on to continue swimming. On her 6th attempt, she became the first to swim the Straits of Gibraltar. She was the first to try the North Channel, multiple attempts, but never made it across. She was the first to swim from Cape Town around Robben Island and back to South Africa. She swam around the island of Man. And she did many endurance events in pools where she would swim for long periods of time. She started at 26 hours and slowly moved her record up to 30 or 46 hours by the time she retired. And crowds would come and they would sing to her from the gallery to encourage her on her swims. In all, she had 51 swims, over half of which were over 26 hours long. She also appeared in the Swim Girl Swim movie, and she was one of the first who really used her sports notoriety for successful endorsements as a female athlete, was endorsed by many products, and actually did fairly well financially, enough so that she could build houses for the homeless through a charity that she founded. And that charity has been incorporated in another one, but still exists to this day. Unfortunately, the houses were destroyed in the Blitz. She got married in 1930, and she retired from swimming 2 years later, became a housewife with 3 children. And despite her fame, she did not speak of her swimming with her family in later years, and she would lie to neighbors and say it wasn't me. Didn't want to talk about it. Don't know why. There's a movie that came out last year called Vindication Swim that talks about her and her endeavor. Ivy Gill crossed later in 1927, actually right between the Gleitz's first swim and her vindication swim. She's actually the first person to make it on her first attempt, and there's like no information on her. This is the only picture I could find when she gave an exhibition 2 years later about swimming somewhere. But she is the first one to ever make it across on her first try. In 28, there were 3 successful swims. Ivy Hawke had dominated races in the Thames for years, had 3 failed attempts, and finally made it in late 1928. Hilda Lottie Sharp. So Jabez Wolfe, as you recall, is the one who was quoted as saying, "A woman will never swim the channel." He was actually a much sought after coach. He turned down most people. It was very hard to get him as a coach. And interestingly, he coached 3 successful swimmers. All 3 were females. And this was the first of them. This is her right here. This is a pacer swimmer that's with her as she made it across. And the last one I'm going to talk about individually is Isaac Helmy. He was the son of an Egyptian general, and you've seen him in a lot of the pictures I've shown. He's here. Here he is with Gertrude Ederle. Here's the picture I showed earlier with Burgess. Helmy and Ederle's over here. He was part of Egyptian royalty, which made him independently wealthy. He had allowance of $25,000 a year, which would be about $500,000 in today's money. And he basically lived in Dover from 1924 to 1930. And he trained at the behest of King Fahd I, who wanted an Egyptian to make the crossing as a matter of national pride. He rented one of the 2 hotels in Cape Grenade, which annoyed the other swimmers because they couldn't find lodging close to the shore, but he rented the entire hotel for one summer. But despite that, he was very popular amongst swimmers, and he was nicknamed the Affable Giant. You can see he's a big guy. He made 5 attempts, but did make it in 1928, and it was the slowest France to England crossing until 1949, when 16-year-old Philip Mickman went just slightly slower than him. So the first 16 crossings took 55 years. Webb's feat was not repeated for 36 after his crossing. Over half the swimmers were professional swimmers, with many had many records. 6 women and 9 men. 3 were Olympic swimmers. Only 2 made it on their first attempt, both women. 1 was a member of royalty. There were several bakers, waiters, typists, people from all different backgrounds, and 1 guy who just did it to make 1,000 pounds. And there were many great swimmers who tried and never succeeded. So this is Jean Chon from France, who was trying the same time as Ederle and never made it across. In the 1930s, so this brings us up to 1930. In the 1930s, there were 9 successful swims, 6 women and 3 men. All of them had really about the same times going across. 2 of them swam from England to France. The rest all swam from France to England. Sunny Lowdry here was coached by Jabez Wolfe. He was one of her other swimmers that made it across. And interestingly, she sent messages of her progress back to shore by carrier pigeon on her trip across. This is Emma Faber, which these are spooky looking goggles that could come out of a horror movie, I think. This is Blower, Thomas Blower, and over here is Sally Bauer in the bottom picture there. Another interesting guy in the 30s who made it, who tried the channel, was a guy named Charles Zibelman, Zimmy the Human Fish. And there are interesting videos of him online. He had lost both of his legs. He was from America, but did swimming things, endurance swimming things all over the world, and made multiple attempts on the channel. One was 18 hours and was stopped due to jellyfish stings. The first successful swimmer without legs to cross the channel was in 1990. And people swim missing arms or legs across the channel. It can certainly be done. 1935 was the first relay. So you can do relays across the channel, and they are done fairly frequently today, but 1935 was the first one. In the 40s, there were, 6 crossings, all men. So the 40s were obviously disrupted by the war. There was no swimming of the channel during World War II if you wanted to live. Interestingly, a couple of them did multiple crossings. Hassan Abdul Reem was part of the Egyptian team and crossed twice in the 1940s. Tom Blower had crossed in the 30s. And Philip Mickman was the youngest to cross at age, I thought 16, was 18 actually at the time. So this was swimmers 26 through 31, so still not a ton of them over time. Egypt, as I mentioned earlier, their last 2 kings felt it was a matter of national pride that they were good swimmers or appeared in the swimming world. And King Fahd I had sent Isaac Helmy to train for several years to swim the English Channel. And his successor, King Farouk, formed a whole team that he sent to the channel every year and to swimming races around the world as a member of national pride. And they were very successful. We're about to talk about the 50s. They started organizing races across the channel. And the first two races were won, the two big ones were won by Egyptians. Hassan Abdel Rahim became the king of the channel as the first to cross 3 and 4 times. And they held the channel crossing records in both directions for many years. Abdel Latif Abdul Haif was named the marathon swimmer of the century by the International Marathon Swimming Federation. And he held the record from England to France from 1953 to 57. He also won what is to this day the longest swimming race in history, the Lake Michigan Challenge of 1963, that happened right from Chicago to Benton Harbor. It is still one of the longest, it was the longest open water swim ever done for like 30 years after it was done. And he won a top prize of $25,000 in 1963. So in 1950, the Daily Mail decided to start races across the channel, and they were organized by Ted Team, who was one of the channel swimmers before. They had 24 contestants on the 22nd of August, 1950. 9 finished. Hassan Abdul Rahim was the first to finish. George, he broke the speed record for the channel at that time. And he was also the first one to cross 3 times. A guy named Roger Lee Morvan from France was leading the whole race and ended up finishing about 10 minutes behind. Hassan Abdul Rahim held the speed record for 11 years after that race. In 1950, that race, so he was awarded $1,000. Eileen Fenton, the first woman, was also given $1,000, and each other competitor received 250 pounds. Fenton had an issue with her shoulder partway across and finished the race with one arm. One swimmer from Greece was pulled out after he was rushed by a 15-foot shark with 3 other sharks next to him. Shark attacks, that's the only one I have ever heard of where there's a direct attack on a swimmer. And another swimmer passed out 300 yards from shore and had to be rescued. Florence Chadwick was the only other swimmer to make it across in 1950, and she was the one who broke Ederle's record. And she ultimately became the queen of the channel. She was the first to cross 2, 3, and 4 times. Great American swimmer. In the 51 race, there were 20 competitors, 18 finished in one day. An Egyptian again won, followed by Roger Lee Morvan, the same guy who got second the first time, got second again. And the guy who'd won the first one got third. The Egyptian team refused their prizes because they felt that the king of Egypt had been insulted by the paper and wouldn't take their prizes. In 1952, the sponsorship of the race changed to a guy named Billy Bolton, who had amusement parks and holiday camps around the world. And they held a race. No one finished, but he awarded the award to Kathleen Mayo, who was the closest to finishing. And she ultimately swam later that year and was able to make it across. The Bolton swims were held through the end of the 1950s. There were no finishers in 53. They call it the race with no finishers because there were 8 people entered, 6 people showed up to swim, and nobody finished. In 54, so we had some people that crossed individually, and over here are the numbers that crossed in each of the races, but there were no finishes again in 1956. So some of the years just nobody made it across, but a total of 93 crossings in the 1950s. So quite a few. It was kind of the heyday of channel swimming. One that crossed in the 50s was Marilyn Bell, who became the youngest to swim the channel at age 17, and she held many records. The current youngest swimmer for a female is 12 years old, and for a male is 11, and those records will stand forever because the Channel Swimming Association has banned swimming under the age of 16. So they will not be broken. The oldest swimmers, when I first told my staff at work that I was swimming the channel, they said, "Will you be the oldest one?" It's not me. So Otto Thanning from South Africa is the oldest swimmer at 73. He's a heart surgeon there. And Lisa Ashmore from the UK is the oldest female at 41 to date, but anybody can do it. Another event of the 1950s, Bruno Tahana has the distinction of being the shortest attempt ever. He made it 100 yards into knee-deep water and decided he was done. Greta Anderson, who was an Olympic gold medalist for Denmark, went pro after failing to make the 1952 Olympics. She became a U.S. citizen later, and she won the Bolton races in 57 and 58 overall. And she was the first female finisher in 59. She broke the female speed record in 1964, and she was the first female with 5 crossings to become Queen of the Channel. She also won the 1962 Lake Michigan Challenge and claimed a $10,000 prize. Ted May was the first to die on an official crossing of the channel. In 1954, he had wanted to cross the channel for several years, but you have to hire a boat to take you across, which cost about 300 pounds, which was quite a bit of money. He couldn't afford and couldn't raise the money to do it. He tried to join the swimming races in 51 through 53, but the guy organizing the races said he wasn't a strong enough swimmer and took other swimmers in his place. So he rigged up this inner tube with a platform and a flashing light and decided he would go on his own without an escort boat across the channel. And he took off in a first attempt in 1954 and got into distress. He was picked up by a Finnish steamer when there were a helicopter, lifeboats, the Coast Guard, and 2 British destroyers searching for him. Despite that, he thought it would be a good idea to try it again. And about a month later, he left again. He was spotted by a British tanker calling for help in distress. They threw a life belt out to him, but missed him by a few feet. It took a while to turn the tanker around to come back. And when they came back, he was gone. And his body was found weeks later on the shore of Holland. There have been 10 people that have died swimming the English Channel in 150 years. The one in 1926 is disputed as not being an actual channel attempt. It was someone on the shore in France going for a swim and drowned, but wasn't really trying to make the channel. Edward May was the first. Kumar Anandan held multiple world records for long swimming. He treaded the water for like 50 hours. He at the time held the most Guinness World Records of anyone. And they figure he died of hypothermia because he didn't have any cold water to train in his hometown of Sri Lanka. And the list goes on here of different people who have died. The last one was last month. This guy right here was raising money for charity on a swim. Partway across, the boat lost him. They turned around and he was gone. They have not found him yet. He is still missing. All the others have been recovered. Hopefully they will find him, but he's been missing for quite a while now. This lady here, Susan Taylor, quit her job for a year to train for the channel to raise money for charity and passed away in her attempt. But a lot of them are fairly young. Most of them are heart attacks. Another was just lost at sea. So there's definitely some risk for crossing the channel. Each time that a disaster happens, the Channel Swimming Association evaluates what happened and changes rules. So your swim will not count if you don't have an accompanying boat with observers on it to verify that you did it. You have to do a 6-hour swim in sub 60-degree water as a qualifier for the channel, and you have to have a medical evaluation by your physician before you go. One of the swims, there was a debate between the observer and the captain. One wanted to pull the swimmer, the other didn't. The swimmer ultimately died. Now they have rules of who's in charge. There's a chain of command. When the pilot of the boat says you are done, you are done. Your swim will not count after that point. The 1960s, there were 52 crossings. Some notable ones. Brohan Das of Pakistan was the first with 5 crossings, and that is him right here. This guy was the first to cross twice, double crossing there and back. Antonio. Brohan Das was also the first with 6 crossings. Greta Anderson, we talked about earlier, made her 5th crossing to become Queen of the Channel. And Ted Erickson from Chicago also made a 2-way crossing and broke the record for the fastest crossing. And that's Ted right here. And that's Greta Anderson right there. And two guys made their first attempts on the channel. One was Kevin Murphy, who I'm pictured with right here on the beach in Dover. And this is Michael Reed. Both have claims to be the king of the channel with the most crossings. Murphy actually has 44 and Reed has 33. The 1970s, there were 184 swims. This is Lynn Cox, who's an amazing open water swimmer. She was the first to swim the Bering Straits between the US and Russia. She was greeted by President Reagan in the White House. It was a big international relations thing. She's a very impressive swimmer. King of the channel. So we've talked a little bit about the most crossings and being the king or the queen of the channel. So this guy, Mervyn Sharp, became the king of the channel when he had his first crossing at age 18 and he was the first to 7 crossings. And then Desmond Renford of Australia became the king with first to 8 crossings. And that's the trophy today for the king of the channel. That's the trophy you get. So then there became a shootout for the king of the channel. And the 70s and early 80s were kind of marked by this. Michael Reed in 1975, or by the end of 1975, Renford had 9 crossings and Reed had 5. And Reed wanted to be the king of the channel. So he started swimming. Reed did 2 in 76 to Renford's 1, so it became 7 to 10. 77, Reed crossed 3 times, Renford once, getting close, 10 to 11. 78, Reed crossed once, Renford extended his lead. 79, Reed crossed 6 times, which for a long time was the record for the most crossings in a year. Renford crossed 3, Reed took the lead. Renford swam 3 swims in 10 days in 1980 to briefly retake the lead, and then Reed took it over again. Both men were knighted by the Queen as part of this. So they're both Sir now. Renford was about 10 years older, actually a little over 14 years older than Reed. So decided enough's enough, and Reed kept on swimming and ultimately was the first to 31 and 33 swims across. So who's the king now? There's a debate. So Kevin Murphy, it's kind of a classic tortoise and hare story. Kevin Murphy started swimming the channel in 1968 at age 19. Reed's first swim was 69. Reed swam, as you just saw, a whole bunch of them over about 10 years and a few more after that to get up to about 31, I think it was. Murphy just kept swimming a few times a year for many years until finally he caught up and pulled ahead. Murphy actually has 34 swims to Reed's 33. However, a new organization to take people across the channel was founded called the Channel Swimming and Piloting Federation. And Murphy did his last 2 swims with them. The Channel Swimming Association does not recognize any swims that they don't do, and they own the rights to the King of the Channel title. And so Reed is still the king of the channel with 33, when Murphy actually has 1 more, and most people consider him to be the real king of the channel now, but they're both friends. Other notable swims of the 70s, John Erickson did the fastest 2-way crossing at 29:50. He broke his father Ted's 1965 record. And then Cindy Nichols from Canada came along and smashed the record by 10 hours for a double crossing. She broke it again in 79. Ted Erickson tried again in 79, but he made it a double crossing, but still couldn't beat her record. Cindy Nichols broke her own record again in 82, and she was the queen of the channel with the first to 6 to 19 crossings. The record for the queen of the channel now, so it was broken a couple times, but is held by Susan Mulroney. The record for double crossing at 17 hours. Philip Rush crossed a few times and holds the record down for the fastest double crossing. There have been 4 people that have crossed the channel 3 times. John Erickson, after racing Nichols, decided enough with this, and he just decided to go more times and get 3. So he was the first with 3. Rush broke his record. A lady named Allison Streeter was crossed 3 times in 1991, and Chloe McCardle, the current queen of the channel, did it in 2015. Streeter is a fairly big name in channel swimming in that she was the first to 20 to 42 crossings. So she held the record for queen of the channel for quite a while. She did her final swim at age 39. She could still certainly swim, but hasn't swam in a while. And she was also made a dame by the queen. The current queen of the channel is Chloe McCardle. So if you cross the channel, there used to be a bar. There still is one called the White Horse, where you could go in and sign your name on the wall. But the only way you could sign your name on the wall is if you swam the English Channel. Their walls are full, so now it's La Fleur. And this is Chloe McCardle's corner of the La Fleur. All of these are crossings or double crossings of the English Channel for 44 currently. She also has the record for the 4th longest swim in history, 77 miles down in the Caribbean, and the 9th longest is a 3-way tie for her 3-way crossing of the English Channel. The record long distance person is Sarah Thomas from Colorado. She is the only person to swim the channel 4 times in 2019, 54 hours. She holds the 3 longest swimming records in history: Lake Champlain at 105 miles, Lake Powell at 80 miles, and her 4-way English Channel crossing at 82 miles. I will probably stop there. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some trends and kind of changes over time, but I think I'll save that to the next talk so we can have some time for questions. Yes.
Hi. When you're saying a triple or a 4 time, you mean without, they're just going back?
Without stopping. You cross, you get to
And-
the other shore, you get out, you have to clear the water. So you get out, I think you have 5 minutes
And
to
then you're
turn
back.
around and back in the water and go back the other way. So a quadruple crossing is England to France, to England, to France, to England. A long ways. Yes.
Have they ever measured the stability of the athlete's weight before and after the swim?
I don't know if there's any studies that show that. And certainly you use a lot of nutrition calories. So my swim across the English Channel, I've calculated I would burn 14,000 calories going across. And you can't replenish all of that fast enough. But it's also skewed by you're absorbing salt water and other things that, you're submerged in water the whole time. So that would have an effect too. I'm not aware of any studies that look at that. I will say that your mouth tastes like it is full of salt for days, and your tongue is swollen. My tongue was swollen for 3 days, and for the first 2, it tasted like I just dumped an entire salt shaker in my mouth. When they talked about Ederle being, hardly could talk, I can understand why, because your tongue just gets swollen up from all the salt water. Yes.
So if France to England is easier, why is everybody swimming from England to France?
Yes.
You included.
So yeah, that's in my remaining one. I'll talk about that next step, but I'll talk about it now. So France became concerned as the number of swimmers went up over time. The time we got into the 90s and 2000s, there were tons of people trying to go across. Travel and stuff became easier. People could go there, and more people were trying to do it. And France became concerned about interfering with shipping traffic to Calais, their main port. And they restricted swimming in their water space. And so they banned all swims from France to England. You are no longer allowed to swim from France to England unless you swim from England to France first. So you can do a 2-way crossing or a 4-way crossing, but you cannot start in France. They also limit the number of boats that can be on the water at any time. There are 2 organizations that take swimmers across: the Channel Swimming Association and the Channel Swimming and Piloting Federation. Those are the only boats that are allowed to take swimmers across. Anybody else should be stopped by the French Coast Guard, and your swim will end. Each of those groups has about 6 or 7 boats that take swimmers across. Only 10 boats total can be out at sea at any time with a swimmer. The French Coast Guard regulates that fairly closely. And there's an area called the Calais Exclusion Zone. If you get in too close to the port of Calais, it interferes with their shipping traffic and your swim is ended immediately by the captain of the boat.
Any more question?
So what do they do to make sure that you're not hurt by boats?
Yeah, so when you are crossing the channel, you are what's called a vessel with limited mobility. I forget what the exact term is we were talking about earlier. But it's the same as like a minesweeper or a boat laying cable. With a swimmer in the water, the swimmer cannot get out of the water. That boat is not maneuverable. You have the right of way over everything except for a ship without a captain. And so the channel, there's swimmers back and forth all the time there in the summer. Calais and Dover are monitoring the traffic through there, and they will direct the freighters and tell them there's a swimming boat and that they don't have the right of way, and those boats will have to turn around us. They have to start their turn 6 miles before they reach us. We had a huge freighter pass about 200 yards behind us, and the captain said he once had an oil tanker pass 25 yards behind the boat with a swimmer in the water. And so they will veer around you, but just. And so there's also special markings on the boat. There's special lights you put on that mark you as a boat with limited maneuverability. And then there are what are called day shapes that you put on the boat during the day that mark that. So you have the right of way as you go through the channel.
What was your path across the channel?
Yeah, so it was a big S. I'll show it next. Actually, I think I have it at the very end. I could show you my path. Oh, maybe. Oh, I went too far. There it is. So that's my path across the channel. I ended up, the weather did not cooperate, as you'll hear next time. So we were not able to swim during the neap tide. And in fact, we swam at the peak of the spring tide, which is the worst time to swim for the tides. And so as we go across, the tide's pushing me. This S is 15 miles wide by 22 miles across. And then you see at the end, it takes this sudden sharp turn. That's where I hit La Barrière in France. And the shore was just going by like this as I was swimming. So I'm not swimming this direction. I'm swimming straight across the whole way. The boat's keeping me pointed towards France, and we're just drifting sideways in the current. So that was my course. And this is the boat heading back to shore. It kept tracking for a little bit, but that's the course across. So we did end up hitting Cape Grenade, which is where you want to hit. That's that point that sticks out from France. But if you miss that, you can see the direction of this current. It goes out like this. And what happens is you get pulled this way away from shore faster than you can swim towards shore. If you miss the point, you're swimming for another many hours, probably 4 to 6 hours until they either you eventually make shore if you're fast enough to do it before this point, or the tide reverses at 6 hours and you start going the other way and you'll get carried back to shore. The captain said he's had people miss this point by 25 yards before and swim another 5-6 hours. So we were lucky. We made the point by 10 minutes going across. So fortunately. Yes.
How many people swim every year, are allowed to swim every year, and what % are successful?
Yeah, so there are roughly 500 spots a year for swimmers. There are 10 boats that can be out at any time. Each boat books about 4 to 5 swimmers per tide. And there are about 10 weeks of swimming in a year. So anyway, math works out, it's about 500 swimmers a year. About 20% of people who sign up and pay the money to get on the boat and swim the English Channel make it across. Many of those end up dropping out, never getting a chance to swim the channel. Either they go and the weather's bad. I talked to one guy who it took his 4th trip to England before he got a chance to swim across. Never had a chance before that. The weather's bad, you have some kind of injury, something else happens that they end up dropping out. My boat had 5 spots for swimmers. 3 swimmers showed up to swim. The other 2 didn't make it for various reasons. And 2 of those 3 made it across. And so overall, if you actually start out on a boat swimming, it's probably closer to 50% that make it across, but it's about 20% overall. So there end up being roughly 100 to 140 swimmers a year now that make it across. And that number now is fairly steady, just because of the regulations and how many swimmers they can have.
I'd like to know how clean the water is.
Yeah, so it was interesting. I wondered when I went too, and I had heard that the water up by shore is not real clear because there's a lot of chalk in it from erosion, but that as you got out in the center, it got really clear. What I found, it was chalky all the way across, but the week we were supposed to go, the weather was bad. There were 7 to 8 foot waves most days. And so I think it was churned up a fair amount from that. I think it gets clearer in the center, but it's clean. It just has chalk particles in the water, essentially.
No junk, no flotsam.
I didn't run into a lot of junk. There is some stuff out there, and there actually is a problem along a lot of England has the issue that a lot of cities in the US have or had, where they have their storm sewer and their sewer
Yeah,
combined, and it rains and they dump it all into the English Channel.
yeah.
So they do have that issue there, but the water seemed pretty clean to me when I was swimming there. Just a lot of chalk
And
floating
you
around
didn't
it.
get sick afterwards.
Nope, didn't get sick afterwards.
Well,
Yeah. Yes.
So did you win anything?
Actually, I did. So I won the Derek Turner Trophy, and I'll show you that next time. But they're trophies for various things: the fastest overall swim in the year. If you break the overall speed record, there's a bunch of different ones, but one is for the earliest or latest swim in the season. Because as you get to the extremes of the season, it's colder, it's harder to make it across. So my swim ended up being October 11th, which ended up was the last swim of the year. And they go by how far away you are from August 22, which is the middle of the swim season. I was 2 days later than the earliest swim was early. And so I got the Derek Turner Trophy. So
Any money locally?
no money. No, there was nobody with $1,000 check at the end.
Oh, big
At
goal.
least I didn't see them.
Were you bitten by jellyfish?
No. So I thought that is a common thing in the channel. They're not, dangerous or deadly type of jellyfish, but I was figuring I would get stung by a jellyfish was going to be part of the deal. There were a few times in training swims where I was swimming and I felt my hand hit something, and jellyfish sting you by their tentacles on the bottom. You can touch the top of them. And I think they will a lot of times, especially when it's rough, will drop deeper. And I think they were down deep enough that I just brushed the top of them. I think that's what it was. I saw a couple as I was swimming across, and we had a couple of the people on the boat saw, but I think because it was so rough, they had dropped down deeper. And so I was fortunate enough. I've still never been stung by a jellyfish. So the trade-off is when it's not rough, it's great for swimming, but the jellyfish are up near the top. I've seen some videos where people are swimming and you see just swarms of jellyfish, but they're all 4 feet underwater and it's clear as can be. So I know it gets clear at times, but I only saw a couple of them.
How many total successful swims have been made since it all started?
Yep, depends on whose counting you look at.
No.
So the Channel Swimming Association only counts the swims that they did, and they count about 1,650 swims. But the Channel Swimming and Piloting Federation actually records all swims that they feel are valid. There's about 2,500 swims that have been recorded. For the Channel Swimming Association, I'm the third person from Michigan that I'm aware of that's done it, and the 301st American.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes.
After you succeeded at this, did you ever have a chance to talk to someone else who had succeeded at this? And what was that like?
Yeah. So it's interesting. There are, not very many open water swimmers that you see around. Interestingly, overseas, there are some. I was in Israel for a trip and ran into a ton of people swimming in the ocean there. And in England, there are a lot of people that go out and swim in the ocean. But anybody, though, if you want to go see a channel swimmer, go to England in channel swimming season and hang out in Dover. They're everywhere. Because there's lots of people there trying to do it. So I talked to a few people before their attempts, but I went to the Channel Swimming Association banquet in April. It's where I got my trophy. And I sat at a table with a couple other people, three other people that had swam the channel. And it was very interesting talking to them. Two were from Turkey, one was from England. The lady from England was really interesting because she had tried about 2-3 years ago and failed. Made it partway across and then didn't make it. And just talking to her about what that was like to come back and to not have made it. And then came back. And at first she was like, I'm never doing this again. And then after about 3 weeks, she was like, I have to do this again. And went back and was ultimately successful. So it was very interesting talking to them because there are not very many around.
Did you see or were bothered by sharks or what's in this top left picture?
Yeah, that's just me swimming. I think that's just a light reflection there. There's no shark. Sharks are quite rare. They say there are no sharks in the English Channel, and that is not true. You read the report earlier of the swim in 1950 where they had a shark. That's the only one I've ever seen where a swimmer was pulled from the water, and I'm not sure if they would have been bitten by the shark if they didn't, but sightings are rare. I heard of one about 3 or 4 years ago where they saw a shark, the people on the boat did, and it rapidly disappeared. The swimmer never even knew it was there, and they finished the whole swim. There are other swims in the world where sharks are much more of an issue. There's the Cook Strait in New Zealand. About 1 in 10 swims there is stopped because of aggressive sharks. And there's the Molokai Strait in Hawaii between Oahu and Lanai. And there about 1 in 4 swims is stopped for sharks. I've seen a video there. They have a bigger boat and a kayak. The kayak stays with the swimmer. And you see the shark circling around the swimmer and the kayaker's trying to scare it away with its paddle. The big boat comes and makes a circle and the shark takes off. And then the shark comes back again. And so they had scared it off a few times. And then when the big boat didn't scare it off, they pulled the swimmer out of the water. So there are places where it's an issue, but the English Channel, it's really not thought of to be an issue at all. There's never been a swimmer attacked by a shark doing a channel crossing.
Did you have to qualify? And secondly, what was your total cost for the experience?
Yeah, so qualifying, you have to do a 6-hour swim in sub 60-degree water, and you just have to have observers sign off on that. It's nothing real fancy. But the challenge can be finding sub 60-degree water. And when I went to do mine, it was summer here, and we hadn't got that done yet, and there was no water that cold in the Lower Peninsula. So I went up to Lake Superior, swam in Eagle Harbor. We picked Eagle Harbor because Lake Superior was 51. And I wanted something below 60, but just below 60. So Eagle Harbor was about 58, and I swam in that 2 different mornings. And then the third morning, we were going to go back and do the 6-hour swim. Well, the wind switched overnight, and the water switched around, and Eagle Harbor was suddenly 53 degrees. Which makes a big difference. Every degree below 60 is just exponentially more. So I spent 6 hours in 53-degree water at Eagle Harbor. That's the coldest I have ever been. I started getting some of the hypothermia symptoms that they talk about. My hands started curling up and stuff. As you're swimming, you can't hold your muscles straight. I probably would have stopped, except for I had from an incident, I had a guy who swam here for a while with the whole group I swim with in Holland named Nick Thompson. He's from Scotland. He came here, lived in Holland for a while, and I had kind of followed him a little online. He was looking at doing a swim across Lake Michigan that I was interested in, and he had done a swim from Holland to Grand Haven, which I was interested in doing that as a training swim for the English Channel. It's about the same length. And ultimately, I did that swim. But he had recorded it with the Marathon Swim Federation. I was trying to figure out how to do that and how to get a hold of him. Well, I couldn't get a hold of him because he had moved. And just before I started swimming with the Masters group here in Holland, probably a year before, his wife was from New Zealand. COVID had started, and they moved to New Zealand. About year and a half ago, so when I had been swimming with this group for about a year, Nick tried to swim the Cook Strait between the two islands of New Zealand, which is one of the Ocean 7 swims, which includes the English Channel. He swam across and he got to the end, and we had all been watching him on a tracker like this. He had drifted way out to sea, looked like the current caught him, wasn't going to make it. And when I woke up in the morning, he had made it across, and we were all giving each other high fives and practice. This is awesome. This is great. And then I got a call that afternoon. Nick died. He got to the end and finished, and mixed stories of what happened, but basically swimming back to the boat, he passed out, went underwater and drowned and died. They tried to revive him. And so we were concerned about hypothermia. I was concerned about hypothermia being one of the issues with that, because swimmers have died from that. He was in the water a lot longer than he thought he was going to be because of this current. And so I bought a temperature monitor. And it's hard. You can get all kinds of temperature monitors that are like wristwatch that monitor your temperature for running. And the problem is none of those work when you're completely submerged in 60-degree water. They're not going to give you an accurate temperature. So there is a device you can buy that you have a pill that you activate that has a thermometer with a Bluetooth reader in it. You swallow the pill and it will read your core body temperature because it's in your core, it's in your intestines, and it transmits it to a watch, which transmits to a laptop, and you can read what your temperature is. So I use that on my swim at Eagle River. And so I started having some of the symptoms where I probably would have said, it's getting hypothermic, I don't want to have problems, I'm going to keep going. But my core body temperature was fine the whole time. If you look at core body temperatures of Lynn Cox is a great example, but mine actually does the same thing. When I sleep at night, so I take the pill, when I did the English Channel, I took the pill the night before I swam, and my core body temperature dropped to about 95, 96 while I was sleeping. And then I got up before I got in the water, and the same happened at Eagle Harbor. My core body temperature went up to about 100.5 in anticipation of getting in the water. Lynn Cox will go up to over 101 before she gets in the water. And when she swims, her core body temperature is actually higher than her baseline because of something called thermogenesis, where you can develop the ability to generate more body heat to keep your core warm. And so a lot of these open water swimmers, and my data is the same, my temperature was actually normal the whole time I was swimming, even though I was freezing cold. My temperature didn't drop until I got out of the water. And there's a phenomenon called after drop, where your body shuts off blood flow to your limbs, reduces blood flow to conserve heat in your core. And what will happen is the blood in your arms and legs gets cold. And once you get out and you start warming, your body opens up those blood vessels and it dumps all that cold water, that cold blood back into your core, and your body temperature will drop substantially. So one of the things you have to be careful of with this is when your body temperature starts to drop, you can't wait until it's at the absolute limit, because it's going to drop when you get out. It's going to drop several degrees when you get out. Hypothermia is down to about, mild hypothermia is 95 degrees, moderate is 90 to 95, and severe is below 90. You hit 85, you are not going to live. Maybe in an OR where you have, all the setup where they sometimes cool your body on purpose for surgeries and things, but out at a boat on sea, you are not going to survive. So you start getting down to the low 90s, it's time to, if you're just out in a recreational swim, it's time to get out way before that. But, you don't want to stop, 3/4 of the way across something. But if you start getting too low, you need to get pulled out of the water or you're not going to live. Yes.
Up there, it says 11:10.
Yep, they write it backwards in Europe.
That's what I was gonna say, is that the foreigners?
Yeah, yep, that's the foreigners. So in Europe, that's the 11th of October, and not December or November 10. So, yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me. Is there something you can do to train yourself to have your core higher?
Yes. So you can train yourself to be cold adapted or warm adapted, not both simultaneously. So when you're doing cold adaptation training, the ideal way I think to do it for swimming is to do cold water swimming. You want to swim in water that's the same temperature or maybe slightly colder than what you're going to be swimming in for the event. And your body will adapt to that and develop the ability to survive in that over time. And so that can be done. And it just basically it takes exposure to the cold to do that.
Oh, okay, we've gone way past our time. It's been fascinating. Your questions are great. He'll be back again next week, so you can hold any additional questions till then. They'll talk about the actual swim, which I'm sure will be very interesting. I also want to mention that there was a recent article on WZZM that you will be swimming Lake Michigan, across Lake Michigan in August, correct?
August, yep.
No sharks.
No
We're not talking
sharks.
about that. So
No jellyfish even.
no jellyfish. We're unsalted here.
Rather pedestrian.
So, yeah. So that should be pretty exciting. We'll be watching for that. But
you.
thank you very much for attending today. Thank you very much. for
Thank you.
today. It's fascinating.
Usually around 80. Yeah. When they cool it down for like the aquatic center is usually 78 to 80. They cool it down for a meet, it might get down to like 77, 76. Yeah.